Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. Now, it's emerged that Boris Johnson was well aware, right from the start, what Nicola Sturgeon would do. He knew that she would turn COVID into a political weapon with which she could force through the independence of Scotland. He knew, and he tried his very best to avoid it. But unfortunately, Nicola Sturgeon will not be cowed, and so she broke ranks despite there being an agreement that there'd be a four-nation approach to the pandemic. She wanted to go her own way. She wanted differences. She wanted to be seen as the great saviour of Scotland. Scotland's mammy. And Boris knew that was exactly the direction she would take. Well, it's been revealed at the COVID inquiry in London that this is the case, and they've even got a written note from Boris making sure that Nicola Sturgeon was locked in. I think now we're all asking her for it to be locked up. But we'll take a look at this. It's a very quick piece. It's not a very long article, but certainly kind of an insight that even BJ knew what Sturgeon was going to do. Here goes. So make sure Sturgeon is locked in. How Boris Johnson tried to stop the SNP leader going her own way on COVID restrictions. And of course she did. She went harder, faster, deeper, longer. And all because she wanted to make that differential. Again, another differential between England and Scotland. Not because she cared one iota about the people of Scotland. Of course not. Doesn't care at all about anyone. She's a sociopath. But she does care that the differences exist so that she can then weaponise these differences in her push for independence so she can become the Grand Empress of Scotland. Anyway, the former Prime Minister and the former First Minister clashed repeatedly throughout the pandemic, with new evidence from the UK COVID inquiry showing that Mr Johnson was well aware of the dangers from the very start. And of course he was. He knew she would not let this opportunity pass. Boris Johnson was worried about Nicola Sturgeon taking a different approach in Scotland. From the very early stages of the COVID pandemic, it can be disclosed. The so-called Four Nations approach saw the UK government leading the response with support from the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish administrations. However, it led to frequent clashes over policy, with both Miss Sturgeon and the Welsh First Minister, Mark Drakeford, and had largely collapsed by the early summer of 2020 because they all wanted to be different. They all wanted to show that they were the ones that cared the most. Look at me, look at me. It was ever thus, of course, with politicians. They're all narcissists. Trouble is, they're all stupid as well. After that point, the SNP administration ran Scotland as already were a separate state. It was closing the border with England at will and introducing different restrictions in almost every area of public life, from schools and workplaces to more stringent rules around face masks and lockdown. And I remember this, and we said, we're not banning everyone from England coming into Scotland. And they tried it. And there was cases of policemen standing at the motorway there. And, are you from England? No, you have to turn around. And people go, no, I don't. Because that's only there. It's not the law. You cannot stop me, blah, blah, blah. All those sort of things. And even in the end, the police had to admit that they had no powers to actually stop anyone. And it really annoyed Sturgeon. So that was a good thing. Anyway, new evidence to the UK COVID inquiry has revealed that former Prime Minister Boris Johnson feared just such an outcome from right at the very start. In remarks on a legal advice note from March the 9th, 2020, relating to the emergency coronavirus bill, Mr Johnson wrote, "Make sure Sturgeon and the DAs, the devolved administrations, stay locked in." He knew what was coming. The bill introduced a raft of emergency powers across the UK and led to a ban on public gatherings and the first nationwide lockdown introduced on March the 23rd. In his comments, Mr Johnson added, "Some of these measures may be useful in the future, but we should make the sunset point loud and clear." Asked about this, about his thought process at the time, former number 10 aide Imran Shafi told the inquiry, "I think the implication of that comment is yes, he was concerned." He said, "I think reading of some of the Cobra discussions around that time, also around issues like mass gatherings, there was a slightly different emphasis from different parts of the UK on the approach there. So I think that may well have been in his mind. And here's sort of a copy of what he wrote. I've got to say, for a man who writes for a living, he does now, his writing's appalling, isn't it? Make sure Sturgeon and DAs stay locked in. Some of these measures may be useful in the future, but we should make the sunset point loud and clear. He should have been a doctor. Take 2 aspirins, call me in the morning. Anyway, in another written note relating to the coronavirus bill, Mr. Johnson wrote that it was important that the DAs were fully bound in with this. But of course, the first thing they did was run a mile and do their own thing because, hey, we're different. Look at us. We're Scottish. We're Welsh. We're Northern Irish. We're not going to do what you say we should do because we want to create those differences so we can push for our own agendas. Quizzed by lawyer Naya Gowman for COVID Brief Families for Justice Kumari Group, Mr. Shaffi said he believed that there were 2 reasons why the PM wanted to keep the leaders of the SNP in Edinburgh, Labour in Cardiff and the DUP in Belfast fully bound in. Well, one is simply that you've got the same rules across the board and everyone knows what the rules are, but that, of course, isn't the case, isn't what happened. Anyway, he said first that there were some very contentious and exceptional measures in this, and so I think it was important to have as common an approach as possible in terms of the political handling. And secondly, he very much wanted as much as possible to have a single UK approach through the pandemic. The joint approach promoted by Mr. Johnson was designed to keep the UK open for business as much as possible while the rest of the world locked down. However, it fell apart within weeks as the death toll mounted rapidly in all 4 home nations and the devolved administrations began to go their own way. Now, Boris Johnson was an idiot. We know that because he's an idiot. What he could have done is actually used something along the lines of DORA, the Defence of the Realm Act. It doesn't actually exist anymore, but there are replacements there. And it's basically the Emergency Provisions Act. I think it's 1999, 1998, something like that. That does give him the right to act in a unitary manner all across the whole of the United Kingdom. And so it wouldn't have been a devolved matter on how these things were done. And that's what he should have done. And if he'd have done that, he'd have cut Sturgeon off at the knees. He'd have retained control. He'd have retained power. She would have moaned like hell over it because it would mean something happening that she had no say over. But that would have done marvels for the people of Scotland, who were locked down longer and harder than anyone else, and who suffered disproportionately far more. Not that she cares, of course. As I say, she, of course, is just a psychopath, a sociopath. No empathy with human beings at all. She's barely recognisable as one. A woman who's never been loved and therefore does not know what the word means. Joyless, empty and soulless. So, of course, she's doing it all for the power it brings. Let's hope it doesn't bring much joy for her in the future. But that's a separate video. Anyway, there we go. So BJ, right from the start, knew exactly what was coming. I'll round off. I'm going to come up and we'll finish the video. Seems Boris is a bit more shrewd than people maybe gave him credit for. If he saw this happening and sort of said day one, they'll use this against us. It does make you wonder why he didn't go with the Emergency Powers Act and actually turn it into a nationwide issue rather than a devolved government issue. Unless he knew that if you gave her enough rope, she might hang herself. Maybe that was the thinking. Unfortunately, he failed to realise that she would be destroying evidence as she went along because she's like Teflon, never will be touched. Makes you wonder, though, doesn't it? Makes you wonder which way it was. I certainly think he should have done it as a national emergency and then done that and then just kept all those weirdos out of the decision-making process. But, you know, c'est la vie, far too late now. Not that I think much of Boris Johnson. He, too, is a complete and utter tosser, you know, but he gets what he deserves. Lost his job, good. But I think he's another one that should have been in prison. All their quaffing and parties and that while telling us we couldn't. What a wanker. Anyway, there we go. Another one done. Still plenty of stories to come today. It's a busy, busy day. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Do please hit the subscribe button. Do please hit the like button. And I will speak to you later. Bye.